In the harsh expanse of the American frontier, a mother's final act of love unfolds in the embers of a burning homestead. Mortally wounded, she uses her waning strength to protect her infant's tiny coffin from the wild, burying it in the smoldering earth. As consciousness fades, fate brings an unlikely savior, a cowboy with his own demons, running from a law he claims has wronged him. Despite the approaching hoofbeats of a pursuing posse, he cannot leave her to die alone. Can this hunted man, running from his own dark past, truly uncover the truth and save her child before it's too late? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Thorne's fingers trembled as she clutched the blood-stained locket against her chest, the metal still warm from where it had rested against her skin. The setting sun painted the Wyoming Territory sky in shades of amber and blood, a fitting backdrop to the horror that had descended upon her homestead mere hours ago. The smoke from her burning home still clouded the air, carrying with it the acrid smell of destruction and the heavy weight of loss. 24 hours earlier, she had been singing to her infant daughter Emma while preparing supper in their modest cabin. The spring air had been sweet with wildflowers, and the gentle breeze carried promise. Sarah had no way of knowing that by this time tomorrow, her world would lie in ashes. They came at dusk, when the day's last light painted long shadows across the land. 5 riders, their faces obscured by dust-caked bandanas, thunder of hooves drowning out Emma's evening lullaby. Sarah had just enough time to scoop up her daughter and run for the root cellar before the first shot splintered the cabin's door. The men's voices carried through the floorboards above, rough with whiskey and malice. "Burn it all!" one growled. "Marshall wants no trace left." The name stopped Sarah's breath in her throat. Marshall Daniel Cooper, the very man who'd assured her the land claim was legal, who'd tipped his hat to her in town just last week with that snake oil smile. Sarah pressed deeper into the cellar's shadows, one hand clamped over Emma's mouth to muffle her whimpers. The baby's skin felt fever-hot against her palm, the illness that had taken hold 3 days ago still burning through her tiny body. Above them, boots stomped across wooden planks, and the sharp crack of breaking furniture echoed through the darkness. Then came the smoke, seeping through the floorboards like ghostly fingers. Sarah's eyes stung as she searched frantically for escape. The cellar's back exit, half collapsed from last month's rains, offered their only hope. She could hear the fire's hungry roar growing louder, feel its heat pressing down. With trembling hands, she wrapped Emma tighter in her blanket. The baby's breathing had grown shallow, her small body limp. "Stay with me, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, fighting back tears as she began clawing through the packed earth, blocking their escape. The smoke grew thicker, and Sarah's lungs burned with every breath. She could barely see now, but her fingers finally broke through to cool night air. She pushed Emma through first, then dragged herself out just as the cellar's wooden supports gave way with a thunderous crash. They emerged into chaos. The cabin was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the stars like desperate fingers. Sarah ran, cradling Emma close, but a bullet caught her in the shoulder, spinning her to the ground. She managed to roll, shielding her daughter from the impact, but the second bullet found her lower back. The pain was immediate and absolute, stealing her breath and clouding her vision. Through the haze, she saw Emma's face, peaceful as if in sleep, but no breath stirred her tiny chest. The fever, the smoke, the fall. It didn't matter which had finally claimed her. Sarah's daughter was gone. Consciousness ebbed and flowed like tide pools in her mind. She knew she had to protect Emma's body from the coyotes and carrion birds. With the last of her strength, she crawled toward the smoldering ruins. The heavy silver locket, a gift from her late husband, would serve as marker. She buried her child in the warm ashes, where the embers would keep her safe until someone could give her a proper Christian burial. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Sarah heard hoofbeats approaching, different from before, a single rider. She tried to reach for the small derringer hidden in her boot, but her arms wouldn't obey. The last thing she saw was a tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky, his duster billowing like wings in the smoke-laden wind. "Hold on, ma'am," a voice rough with trail dust urged. "I've got you." Then consciousness slipped away entirely, and Sarah Thorne fell into darkness as complete as the grave she'd dug for her child. James Hawkins had been riding hard since dawn, the wanted poster in his saddlebag, weighing heavier than any iron shackles. 3 days ago, he'd been the most respected ranch foreman in Colorado Territory. Now he was running from a murder he didn't commit, with a $2,000 bounty on his head. The smoke rising against the twilight sky gave him pause. Common sense told him to steer clear. A man in his position couldn't afford to invite trouble. But something about the way the flames licked at the darkening horizon pulled at him like a moth to lantern light. His mare, Shadow, snorted nervously as they approached the burning homestead. The acrid smell of scorched wood mixed with something else, something that made his stomach turn. He'd smelled enough battlefields during the war to recognize death when it hung in the air. The torn, wanted poster crinkled in his pocket as he dismounted, his hand resting instinctively on his Colt. Wanted James Hawkins for the murder of Judge William Prescott. The words were seared into his memory like a brand. He'd seen the judge's real killer, watched helplessly as the man in the black duster gunned down Prescott in his own chambers. But Hawkins' word meant nothing against the testimony of the territory's most powerful men. Movement caught his eye, a flash of pale cloth against the charred earth. He found her half-conscious, blood seeping through her dress where 2 bullets had found their mark. Her fingers clutched a silver locket, and her face bore the peaceful resignation of someone who'd made their peace with death. The distant thunder of hoofbeats made his decision more urgent. The posse had been gaining ground all day, and the burning homestead would draw them like vultures to carrion. Every minute he delayed increased the chance of capture. But as he knelt beside the wounded woman, her eyes flickered open, revealing depths of pain that struck him harder than any physical blow. "My baby," she whispered, her voice rough with smoke and grief. "I had to keep her safe in the Embers." Hawkins felt the weight of choice bearing down like a desert sun. The posse was coming, the woman was dying, and somewhere in those smoldering ruins lay a child's body, buried in ash and desperation. He'd been running from false justice for 3 days. Perhaps it was time to stand for true justice instead. With gentle hands that belied his weathered appearance, he lifted the woman as carefully as he could. She weighed no more than a child herself, her body burning with fever where it pressed against his chest. Shadow danced nervously as he mounted, but steadied at his familiar touch. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I know a place. Old Trapper's cabin. About 3 miles north, not much, but it's defensible, and there's a spring nearby." She didn't respond, having slipped back into unconsciousness, but her fingers remained locked around that silver locket, as if it were an anchor to life itself. As they rode into the gathering darkness, Hawkins could hear the posse's hoofbeats. Growing closer, they'd see the smoke soon if they hadn't already. But he knew these mountains better than any of them, had spent years exploring every hidden trail and shadowed canyon. The wanted poster crackled again as he shifted in the saddle, reminding him of everything he was risking. But looking down at the woman's face, pale as moonlight against his dark coat, he knew he'd made the only choice his conscience would allow. Sometimes a man had to stop running from one thing to start running toward another. And somehow, Hawkins suspected that the truth about Judge Prescott's murder and the burning of this homestead were tangled up like twin strands of a rope. Pull one, and the other would surely follow. The night swallowed them as they rode north, leaving behind only hoofprints that the wind would soon erase. But in Hawkins' mind a path was forming, one that led not to escape, but to answers. And maybe, just maybe, to redemption. Dawn broke over the trapper's cabin like a watercolor painting, soft light filtering through pine boughs. Hawkins had spent the night tending to the woman's wounds, using skills learned during darker days of the war. She drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering about Embers and Marshals while he cleaned and bandaged the bullet wounds as best he could with limited supplies. When she finally woke clear-headed, the sun had climbed halfway to noon. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sarah Thorne, my name in case—" She didn't finish the thought, but her meaning was clear enough. "James Hawkins," he replied, offering her water, "though these days most folks are calling me something else entirely." He didn't elaborate, but she noticed how his hand strayed to his gun belt whenever shadows moved outside the cabin's grimy window. "My daughter," Sarah said, struggling to sit up. "I have to go back, have to make sure—" "You're not going anywhere with those wounds," Hawkins cut in, gentle but firm. "But I'll go. There might be something left that tells us who did this." He didn't mention that he'd already spotted fresh hoofprints in the morning dew. The posse had found the homestead. In the saddlebag beside his bedroll lay a scorched piece of paper he'd retrieved before their escape, a land deed he'd spotted glinting in the ashes. The document bore the territorial seal and Sarah's name, but something about the formatting nagged at his memory. The ride back to the homestead took longer than necessary. Hawkins had to circle wide to avoid the main trails. When he finally crested the ridge overlooking the burned-out cabin, he found exactly what he'd expected: lawmen swarming over the scene like ants on spilled sugar. He recognized Sheriff Mills from wanted posters he'd seen, a bulldog of a man with a reputation for persistence. The sheriff knelt in the ashes, examining something Hawkins couldn't quite make out from his vantage point in the tree line. "Marshal, Cooper wants every inch of this place gone over," Mills was saying to his deputies. "Any sign of a woman or a child, you bring it to me straight away." There was something in his tone. Not concern for missing settlers, but something harder. Urgency, fear. Hawkins watched them search, his mind working. The marshal's name again, the same one Sarah had mentioned in her fever dreams, the same marshal who'd been Judge Prescott's closest friend and who'd testified against Hawkins at his hastily arranged trial. A deputy emerged from the ruins, holding something that caught the sunlight. Sarah's locket dropped during their escape. Sheriff Mills snatched it, examined it, then pocketed it with a grunt of satisfaction. She was here all right. Get the dogs. She couldn't have gone far. With those wounds. Moving carefully through the underbrush, Hawkins worked his way closer. Years of tracking cattle had taught him how to move silent as a shadow when he needed to. He could just make out the conversation between Mills and his senior deputy. "Marshals. Awful worried about one homesteader woman," the deputy said, scratching his head. Mills spat tobacco juice into the ashes. "Ain't the woman he's worried about. It's what she might have heard when those boys did the job. Judge's murder stirred up too much attention. Can't afford any loose ends." Hawkins froze. There it was. The connection he'd suspected. Judge Prescott's murder and the attack on Sarah's homestead were linked, two blood-stained threads in the same tapestry. The scorched land deed in his saddlebag suddenly felt even more significant. He'd seen hundreds of legal documents in Judge Prescott's office, back when he was still a respected rancher. If he could just figure out what bothered him about this. One day a hunting hound's bark split the morning air, and Hawkins knew his time was up. He retreated as quietly as he'd come, but his mind was racing faster than his horse ever could. The marshal, the judge's murder, the land deed, the homestead attack, pieces of a puzzle that was starting to take shape. Back at the cabin, he found Sarah awake and more alert, though pain lined her face. When he showed her the land deed, her eyes widened in recognition. "The marshal himself filed this for me," she said, fingers tracing the territorial seal. "Said it was all proper and legal. But 2 weeks ago, a man came, said there was another claim on the land, older than mine. When I wouldn't sell—" Her voice trailed off, remembering flames and gun smoke. Hawkins held the deed up to the light, streaming through the cabin's window. And there it was. What had been bothering him all along. The paper stock, the typeset, even the seal itself. He'd seen enough of Judge Prescott's official documents to know. "This deed," he said quietly, "is a forgery. A damn good one, but A forgery all the same. They sold you land they didn't have the right to sell, knowing it would end exactly like this. Sarah's face hardened with understanding. How many others? She whispered. How many other homesteads have they burned? Before Hawkins could answer, a twig snapped outside the cabin. His gun seemed to leap into his hand of its own accord as he moved to the window. Through the grimy glass, he spotted movement in the trees. The posse had found them. Hawkins moved with the fluid grace of a man long accustomed to danger, helping Sarah to the cabin's back room while keeping his voice barely above a whisper. There's a cellar under the floorboards, he murmured. Trapper used it for storing. Pelts. It ain't comfortable, but it's deep. Sarah's face went ash-white at the mention of a cellar, remembering smoke and her daughter's final moments. But she nodded, steeling herself. As Hawkins helped her down, something metallic caught his eye among the sheriff's abandoned supplies. A badge, partially hidden under old furs. Someone else used this cabin recently? He said, pocketing the badge. Law enforcement by the looks of it. The implications sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cool cellar air. Outside, horses nickered softly. Hawkins counted at least 3 distinct sources. The posse was spreading out, taking their time. They knew their quarry was trapped. You there in the cabin? Sheriff Mills's voice boomed across the clearing. Come. On out, Hawkins. We know you're in there. Sarah grabbed Hawkins' arm. There's something you should know, she whispered, her voice urgent despite its weakness. The night Judge Prescott died. I was there. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. What? I'd gone to his offices late to ask about inconsistencies in my deed. I heard arguing inside his chambers. The judge was shouting at someone about forged documents and stolen land. Then the shots. She swallowed hard. I saw the killer leave, but I was too scared to come forward. It was Marshall Cooper, Hawkins finished, the pieces finally clicking into place. In a black duster. Sarah's eyes widened. How did you? Because I was there too. Different door, same view, saw everything, but Cooper saw me watching. Next thing I knew, I was facing a murder charge with every lawman in the territory ready to swear I was guilty. A bullet splintered the cabin's window, sending them both ducking lower. Time's up, Hawkins, Mills shouted. Don't make this messier than it needs to be. In the cellar's dim light, Sarah clutched her locket. The judge was gathering evidence, she continued rapidly. He found out about the land scheme. How Cooper and his men were forging deeds, selling claims they didn't own, then driving people off when the real owners showed up. My deed wasn't the only forgery. Another shot. Closer this time. Hawkins could hear men moving into position around the cabin. The judge was going to expose them all, Sarah said. That's why Cooper killed him. And that's why they burned my home. They thought I might have heard something that night. They were right. Hawkins' mind raced. The badge he'd found belonged to one of Cooper's men. They'd been using this cabin as a way station for their operations, which meant he began searching the cellar more thoroughly, running his hands along the rough-hewn walls. There, behind a stack of mouldering furs, his fingers found a leather satchel. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Land deeds, property records, and correspondence, all bearing the distinct signs of forgery he'd noticed on Sarah's deed. But more importantly, there were letters in Judge Prescott's hand, letters documenting the entire conspiracy. The judge didn't just suspect, Hawkins breathed. He had proof, must have hidden it here when he realized Cooper was onto him. Sarah's face showed a fierce satisfaction despite her pain. Then Emma didn't die for nothing. This can bring them all down. The cabin's front door splintered under a heavy boot. Time had run out. Hawkins drew his revolver, checking the load more from habit than necessity. I'm going to draw them away, he said. Wait for dark, then head north. There's a mission station about 10 miles up. Father Michael knows me, he'll help. They'll kill you, Sarah protested. Hawkins managed a grim smile. Been running 3 days from a murder I didn't commit. About time I started running towards something worth dying for. He handed her the satchel of evidence. Get this to someone who can use it. Someone outside Cooper's reach. Before she could argue further, he was up the cellar steps. They could. Here Mills deploying his men, preparing for a final assault. But Hawkins had one last card to play, the badge he'd found. In the dim light, he could finally make out the name etched on it. Deputy Warren Collins, the same Collins who'd testified against him at his trial. "Hey, Mills," he shouted, "found something interesting up here. Reckon Marshal Cooper would love to know his deputy's been careless with his badge." A moment of telling silence followed. Then Mills's voice, with an edge of uncertainty. "What are you on about, Hawkins?" "Collins' badge, right here, along with some mighty interesting papers in Judge Prescott's hand. Guess this wasn't just a trapper's cabin after all." Through gaps in the floorboards, Hawkins saw Sarah pressing herself deeper into the shadows, understanding dawning in her eyes. He wasn't just buying her time. He was sowing seeds of doubt, making Mills wonder if his own allies might be preparing to betray him. The gambit worked. The confident siege mentality shifted to nervous tension. Men who'd been bold about storming. The cabin now held back, throwing uncertain glances at each other. Hawkins used their hesitation to make his move. He burst through the back door, firing 2 shots into the air, drawing every iron gun toward his fleeing figure. Behind him, he heard Mills bellowing orders, heard the thunder of pursuit. But he also heard the conspiracy's foundation beginning to crack. Mills' authority, once absolute, now carried a questioning tone. Hawkins smiled as he rode. He might not survive the day, but he'd given Sarah and justice a fighting chance. Father Michael's mission station was little more than a weathered chapel and a small cottage, nestled in a valley where ponderosa pines grew thick enough to hide it from casual observation. Sarah arrived just as the priest was lighting his evening candles. Her wounds reopened from the journey. The elderly priest took one look at her condition and asked no questions. He simply helped her inside, his gnarled hands steady as he changed her bandages. Only when she was settled in a narrow cot did he reach for his worn leather journal. "Tell me," he said softly, dipping his pen in ink, "what brings you to my door?" Sarah's throat tightened as she revealed everything. Emma's death. The land. Scheme. Judge Prescott's murder. Father Michael recorded it all in his precise handwriting, each word an additional weight against Marshal Cooper and his conspirators. "James Hawkins," the priest mused, writing the name with careful strokes. "I know him well, a good man, despite what they say." He turned the journal so Sarah could see earlier entries. "He's not the first to seek sanctuary here. Others have, come bearing similar stories of forged deeds and burned homes." The journal's pages revealed a pattern, dates, names, locations. Father Michael had been quietly documenting the conspiracy for months, building a case one testimony at a time. "The church may not have legal authority," he explained, "but we have a long memory and many friends." Sarah touched the pages where other mothers had recounted their losses. "Have any of them? Did anyone else lose?" She couldn't finish. Father Michael's eyes softened with understanding. "No, child. You are the first to pay so dear a price." He closed the journal gently. "But perhaps you will be the last." A coded knock at the door made them both tense, but the priest smiled. "Ah, right on time." The door opened to reveal a young Native American woman in a cotton dress carrying a basket of medical supplies. "Clara Two Hearts," Father Michael introduced her. "My eyes and ears in town. She serves in Marshal Cooper's household." Clara's dark eyes were sharp with intelligence. "The marshal is afraid," she reported, laying out fresh bandages. "Sheriff Mills returned empty-handed, but the story of the missing evidence has them all turning on each other. Deputy Collins was found dead an hour ago. They're calling it suicide." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Collins' badge in Hawkins' hand. The conspiracy was beginning to devour itself. "And Hawkins?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "Still free," Clara replied. "They lost him in the high country, but the marshal has called in more men. They're offering 3,000 now for him, dead or alive." Father Michael made a final entry in his journal, his writing now taking on the weight of prophecy. "The mighty build their fortresses on foundations of sand," he murmured. It takes but one truth to wash them away. Sarah touched her locket, thinking of Emma. One truth, bought at such a terrible price. But as she rested in the mission's sanctuary, watching Father Michael and Clara tend to her wounds, she felt something she hadn't expected to find again: hope. Clara moved through the marshal's office like a shadow, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, lingering near half-open doors where men spoke in hushed, angry tones. The telegraph machine clattered constantly now, spitting out messages that made Marshal Cooper's face grow darker with each passing hour. She memorized one such telegram before Cooper crumpled it in his fist. Judge Harrison arriving Friday. Full inquiry into Prescott murder and land office irregularities. The message bore the territorial governor's seal. The conspiracy's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and Clara could feel the tension crackling through the office like lightning before a storm. Deputies who'd once swaggered now moved, in nervous pairs, hands never far from their weapons. Trust, that fragile thread that had bound them together, was unraveling strand by strand. Marshal Cooper had retreated to his office with a bottle of whiskey and his ledger books. Through the door, Clara could hear him muttering as he crossed out names, rewrote figures, trying to cover his tracks. But some stains, she knew, ran too deep to hide. In town, whispers spread like wildfire. The suicide of Deputy Collins had opened floodgates of speculation. Clara caught fragments of conversations as she made her way to the mission station that evening. Collins knew something. Judge Prescott's murder, homesteaders driven out. Hawkins was innocent all along. The name of Sarah Thorne had begun circulating too, spoken in tones of awe and fear. The woman who'd buried her child in Embers had become something more than human in the telling, a ghost of vengeance, a harbinger of justice long delayed. At the mission, Father Michael added Clara's intelligence to his journal while Sarah listened intently, her strength returning day by day. The priest had been busy too, sending copies of his documented evidence to trusted contacts throughout the territory. "The governor's inquiry changes everything," Sarah said, touching her locket. "Cooper and his men, they'll try to run." Clara shook her head. "No. The marshal's called in too many favors, borrowed too much money. He's planning something desperate." As if to confirm her words, a new telegram arrived in town. Bounty on Hawkins raised to 5,000. Shoot on sight. But it wasn't the reward that made Clara's blood run cold. It was the signature at the bottom. Not Cooper's name, but another's. Judge Harrison himself. "The corruption goes higher than we thought," Father Michael said gravely, making a final entry in his journal. "They're not just trying to cover up land theft anymore. They're trying to bury the truth about Judge Prescott's murder before Harrison arrives." Sarah's face hardened with determination. "Then we need to make sure that truth is heard. Emma's in death, Collins' suicide, all of it." She looked at the fresh bandages on her wounds, now nearly healed. "It's time to stop hiding." But Clara's next words froze them all. "Cooper's men are searching every building in town tomorrow, including the mission." The sanctuary that had sheltered them was about to become a trap. The mission's hidden cellar smelled of earth and old incense. As Sarah and Clara sorted through Marshal Cooper's private letters, discovered in his desk by Clara's careful searching, Father Michael stood watch above, ready to ring the chapel bell at the first sign of trouble. "Here," Clara whispered, holding up a letter by candlelight, from Judge Harrison, dated 3 months ago. The paper was fine linen, the handwriting elegant, but the words damning. "Land office cooperation secured. Proceed with acquisitions as discussed. Prescott remains troublesome." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. They were all in it together. Harrison wasn't coming to investigate. He was coming to bury the evidence for good. A floorboard creaked. Overhead, followed by Father Michael's measured voice greeting someone. Both women froze, listening to the muffled conversation above. "Sheriff Mills," the priest was saying, "what brings you to the house of God at this hour?" Routine search? Father, Marshal's orders. Seen anything unusual lately? Anyone seeking sanctuary? The word dripped with meaning. Through gaps in the floorboards, Sarah could see Mill's boots moving across the chapel, his spurs leaving scratches in the old wood. Only lost souls. Sheriff, as always. Father Michael's tone remained calm, but Sarah heard the subtle warning in his next words. Would you care to examine the confessional? Perhaps the grave markers outside. Mill's boots stopped. Even corrupt men feared divine judgment, it seemed. No need, Father, but we'll be watching. Cooper wants this wrapped up before Harrison arrives. After Mills departed, Sarah emerged from the cellar with the letters clutched tight. We can't wait any longer. Harrison arrives tomorrow. Once he and Cooper meet, every piece of evidence we have will be worthless. There's more, Clara said quietly. I overheard Cooper talking about another homestead, just north of here, planning to burn it tonight. A widow named Mary Carson and her 3 children. Sarah's face went pale, remembering flames and smoke, and a tiny coffin. No, not again. She turned to Father Michael. Where's the nearest telegraph office outside Cooper's control? Silver Creek, the priest replied. 20 miles north. But the passes are watched. Then we don't use the passes. Sarah's voice had steel in it now. Clara, can you get a message to Hawkins? He needs to know about Harrison. Clara nodded. He's been hiding in the old mining caves. I can reach him. Sarah touched her locket, thinking of Emma. Another child's grave avoided, perhaps. Another mother spared her pain. Tell him to meet me at Silver Creek. We're going to send every piece of evidence we have to the territorial governor, and we're going to save that family. But as they prepared to move, Father Michael's chapel bell began to toll, the warning they dreaded. Through the window they could see torches approaching through the gathering dusk. Cooper himself was leading this search party. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of forged documents spread across Father Michael's desk as Cooper's men surrounded the mission. Each paper told the same story. Legitimate deeds altered with surgical precision. Dates changed, names replaced. A web of lies written in ink and sealed with stolen authority. The root cellar connects to the old mission catacombs, Father Michael whispered, his weathered hands already pulling at a hidden lever beneath his writing desk. They'll lead you to the creek bed. Clara gathered the evidence into an oilskin. Pack it, while Sarah checked her borrowed revolver. The weight felt strange but necessary, like the burden of vengeance she now carried. What about you? Sarah asked the priest. Cooper won't dare harm a man of God. Not openly. His smile held a lifetime of wisdom. Besides, my journal is already on its way to the Archbishop. Insurance, shall we say. Heavy boots climbed the mission steps. Cooper's voice carried through the thick door. Open up, Father, Marshal's business. Sarah and Clara slipped into the cellar as Father Michael moved to answer. The underground passage smelled of age and earth, centuries of prayers soaked into the stone. Their single lantern cast strange shadows as they hurried through the narrow tunnel. Behind them, they heard Cooper's men beginning their search. The marshal's voice echoed with barely contained fury. Where are they, priest? Where's the Thorn woman? My daughter, Father Michael replied with magnificent calm. I have heard no confessions today. The tunnel curved beneath the chapel cemetery, past ancient bones and newer sorrows. Sarah thought of Emma, buried in embers rather than consecrated ground, and felt her resolve harden like steel in a forge. They emerged in the creek bed, just as gunfire erupted at the mission. Sarah turned back, but Clara caught her arm. Father, Michael can take care of himself. We have to reach Silver Creek before Harrison arrives. The night swallowed them as they ran, guided by Clara's knowledge of hidden trails. The packet of forged documents bounced against Sarah's hip with each step, a paper testament to greed and murder. Near midnight, they reached the Carson homestead. Lights still burned in the windows, but shadows moved in the surrounding trees. Cooper's men preparing their attack. We can't help them alone, Clara whispered. As if in answer, a familiar figure materialized from the darkness. James Hawkins, trail-worn but alive, his eyes hard with purpose. "Got Clara's message," he said softly. "Harrison's arrival changes everything." He nodded toward the homestead. "Mrs. Carson's kin are already moving her out. I made sure word reached them." Sarah felt relief flood through her, followed by a deeper emotion she wasn't ready to name. "The evidence? Telegraph office in Silver Creek opens at dawn. But Cooper will have men watching it. Then we'll need a distraction." Sarah touched her locket, remembering smoke and flame. Something to draw them away from both the office and the Carson place. Hawkins studied her face in the starlight. "You have a plan." "Yes." Sarah's voice was steady. "We're going to give Cooper exactly what he fears most, a ghost rising from the ashes." Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of fire as Sarah approached her burned homestead. She wore Clara's dress, her hair down like the ghost stories already spreading through town. In her hands, she carried something that made her heart ache. A child's rag doll, salvaged from the Carson home. Hawkins watched from the ridgeline, rifle ready. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Sarah would be seen near the ruins, drawing Cooper's men away from both the telegraph office and the Carson place. The very superstitions that had kept locals away from the haunted homestead would work in their favor. But as Sarah moved through the ashes of her former life, something caught her eye. The ground near where she'd buried Emma. It had been disturbed recently. Her heart stopped. The small wooden box she'd buried wasn't there. The doll slipped from her numb fingers as she dropped to her knees, frantically searching the disturbed earth. Her fingers found something. Not the box, but a small toy horse, its paint scarred by fire, but still recognizable. Emma's favorite toy. But she hadn't buried it with the box. "Looking for this?" Marshal Cooper emerged from the shadows of the ruined cabin, holding a small wooden box. Her box, but his next words shattered her world. "Interesting thing about this box," Cooper said, his voice casual. "It's empty." Sarah's mind reeled. "No, I buried her myself." "Did you?" Cooper stepped closer. "Did you check the box before?" "You buried it, Sarah, in all that smoke and confusion?" Memory hit her like a physical blow. The fever that had taken Emma, or had it. The baby had gone so still, so quiet in the root cellar, in her panic and pain, with bullets flying. "Where is she?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Safe." Cooper's smile was cold. "Insurance, you might say, against a mother's inconvenient testimony." The world tilted. Emma was alive. All this time, a rifle shot cracked across the clearing. Cooper's hand jerked, the box falling into the ashes. Sarah lunged for it, but the marshal's boot pinned her wrist. "Call off your pet gunman," Cooper snarled, his revolver aimed at her head, "or you'll never see her again." "Sarah!" Hawkins's voice carried from the ridgeline. "Don't listen, he's lying." But she could see the truth in Cooper's eyes, the confidence, the absolute control. He had Emma, had taken her while Sarah lay bleeding, switched the boxes in the confusion. "Where?" she demanded. "Harrison knows." Cooper's laugh was bitter. "His estate in Denver. Did you think he was really coming to investigate? He's coming to collect his property, the deeds, the evidence, and one very valuable little girl." Another shot kicked up dirt near Cooper's feet. A warning. The marshal didn't flinch. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to call off Hawkins. We're going to ride to town together, nice and peaceful. You'll sign a statement saying you killed Judge Prescott, tried to frame me. Do that, and Harrison will make sure Emma finds her way home." Sarah felt the weight of her hidden revolver, but Cooper's gun was already drawn. One shot would end any chance of finding Emma. "Why?" she asked, playing for time. "Why all this? The land scheme, Prescott's murder?" "Progress requires sacrifice." Cooper's voice held genuine conviction. "The territory needs men of vision, not small-minded homesteaders cluttering up valuable land. Prescott couldn't see that. You and your kind. You're just in the way." The sudden thunder of hooves made them both turn. Riders approaching, dozens of them, but not Cooper's men. Father Michael led them, his black cassock billowing like judgment. Behind him rode the Archbishop himself, along with the territorial governor and a company of federal marshals. Cooper's face went slack with shock. Harrison was supposed to... Judge Harrison, Father Michael's voice rang out, signed a full confession 3 hours ago. Silver Creek's telegraph office opens early on Sundays. Sarah saw her chance. She rolled, grabbing Emma's toy horse from the ashes and swinging it hard into Cooper's gun hand. The marshal staggered, his shot going wild. Hawkins appeared as if, by magic, rifle trained on Cooper's heart. But it was Sarah who picked up the fallen revolver, aiming it with rock-steady hands. "Where is my daughter?" Each word was etched in ice. Cooper looked at the approaching riders, at the gun in Sarah's hand, and saw his world crumbling. "Denver," he said finally. "Harrison's estate. The nursemaid's name is Margaret Wells. She thinks Emma is Harrison's orphaned grandchild." Sarah kept the gun leveled as federal marshals dismounted and approached. "If you're lying..." "He's not." Clara emerged from the trees, leading a horse. Draped across its saddle was a leather satchel. "I found this in his office. Letters from Harrison addressing all the arrangements. Emma's alive, Sarah, and now we know where to find her." The governor himself stepped forward to supervise Cooper's arrest. But Sarah barely noticed. She was holding Emma's toy horse, feeling hope bloom where only vengeance had lived. Hawkins touched her shoulder gently. "Denver's a 4-day ride. 5. If we're careful." Sarah looked up at him, seeing her own determination mirrored in his eyes. Someone needs to watch your back." His smile held promises neither of them was ready to voice. "Besides, I hear Denver's a good place for new beginnings." The sun broke fully over the horizon, turning the ashes of Sarah's old life to gold. Somewhere to the east, her daughter was waiting. The road would be long and dangerous. Cooper and Harrison surely had other allies. But as she mounted up beside Hawkins, Sarah felt nothing but certainty. This time, she was riding towards something. Not away. This time, she had hope. Father Michael's mission station was a flurry of activity as Sarah pored over the hidden map they'd found in Cooper's satchel. Her fingers traced the marked routes between frontier towns, each one a possible escape path for Harrison's conspirators. But her eyes kept returning to Denver, marked with a red star, where Emma waited. "Harrison's estate is here," Clara said, pointing to a spot just outside the city. "The nursemaid, Margaret Wells, has rooms in the East Wing, but there's something else you should know." She hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her apron. "I found this among Cooper's things. It's a letter about Emma from the nursemaid." Sarah unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was neat, feminine, full of mundane details about Emma's daily life. She was learning to walk. She loved story time. She missed her mother without knowing why. "She's happy," Sarah whispered, touching the words as if they might vanish. "Safe and loved, at least. Which makes what we're about to do even harder," Hawkins said quietly. "We're not just rescuing her. We're taking her from someone who's cared for her these past months." Sarah felt the weight of that truth settle over her. Margaret Wells isn't our enemy. She's another victim of Harrison's lies. Father Michael cleared his throat. "The federal marshals are planning to move Cooper to Denver for trial. Harrison's confession means they'll be searching his estate, officially." His emphasis on the last word was clear, but they won't move for at least a week. Bureaucracy, you understand. "A week we don't have," Clara added. "Harrison's allies will be moving fast now that Cooper's arrested. They'll want to tie up loose ends, including Emma." The thought made Sarah's blood run cold. Hawkins spread out another map, this one showing the trails through the high country. 3 routes to Denver, he said. Main road through the passes, fastest but watched. River route, slower but safer. Or here, his finger traced a thin line through the mountains. Old mining trails. Dangerous, but nobody watches them because nobody's fool enough to use them. Nobody except a desperate mother and a man with Nothing left to lose, Sarah said, managing a small smile. 4 days, Hawkins agreed, if we're lucky and the weather holds. Clara laid out the supplies she'd gathered, food, ammunition, medical supplies, and something else, new clothes for Emma. For the journey home, she said simply. Sarah held up a tiny dress, imagining her daughter wearing it. The fabric blurred. As tears finally came, not tears of grief this time, but of hope mixed with fear. She'd buried an empty box, mourned at a false grave, while Emma lived and grew without her. I failed her, Sarah whispered. Left her alone all this time. No, Hawkins' voice was firm. Cooper and Harrison stole her from you, but now we're going to steal her back. Father Michael's wrinkled hand covered hers. The Lord works in mysterious ways, my daughter. Perhaps Emma needed someone to care for her while you gathered the strength and allies to truly save her. Sarah looked around the room at these people who had become more than allies. Clara with her quiet strength, Father, Michael with his unwavering faith, and Hawkins, whose own quest for justice had become entwined with hers in ways she was only beginning to understand. She tucked the nursemaid's letter into her locket, next to Emma's tiny portrait. We leave at dawn, she said, through the mining trails. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. A storm was coming, but Sarah Thorne had already weathered the worst storm of her life. This one, at least, she wouldn't face alone. In the mission's candle-lit study, Clara spread out a weathered piece of parchment, the Confederates' list, as they'd taken to calling it. Names and dates filled the margins, a web of corruption written in Cooper's meticulous hand. Each entry represented someone who'd played a part in their scheme, from corrupt land officers to hired guns. These men will be watching the trails, Clara explained, marking positions on their map. Cooper kept detailed records of everyone on his payroll, some for land fraud, some for worse. Sarah studied the list, committing names to memory. Many were familiar, men who'd tipped their hats to her in town, smiled at Emma in the general store. The betrayal cut deep. Not all of them are enemies anymore, Hawkins said, pointing to several names crossed out in red ink. These ones Cooper marked as unreliable, people who started having doubts. Father Michael nodded. The conscience is a powerful force. Even the corrupt sometimes hear its call. A knock at the door made them all freeze, but it was only Mary Carson, the widow they'd saved from Cooper's men. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. For your journey, she said, setting it down. Inside were bread, dried meat, and something else, a small porcelain doll. It was my Elizabeth's. She insisted Emma should have it. Sarah touched the doll gently. Thank you for everything. More visitors arrived as the evening deepened. A shopkeeper with ammunition hidden in coffee sacks. A stage driver with information about Harrison's estate. A telegraph operator who'd witnessed Cooper sending coded messages. Each brought something, supplies, information, or simply the promise to watch the roads and send word if trouble approached. Cooper's arrest loosened. Tongues, Clara observed. People are tired of living under his shadow. Hawkins cleaned his rifle as they talked, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Fear makes people quiet, he said, but courage spreads like wildfire once it catches. Sarah sorted through the supplies, carefully packing saddlebags for the journey ahead. The weight had to be just right, enough to survive the mountain trails, but not so much as to slow them down. Every ounce could mean the difference between reaching Emma and being caught by Harrison's men. There's something else, Clara said quietly, pulling a sealed envelope from her dress. A letter from Margaret Wells to Harrison. I borrowed it, from Cooper's office before the marshals arrived. The letter confirmed their worst fears. Harrison was planning to take Emma east, far beyond their reach. They had 3 days at most before he would spirit her away to Boston or New York, where his influence ran deep as mountain roots. Sarah felt the familiar tide of despair rising, but forced it down. Emma was alive. Everything else was just obstacles to be overcome. We'll need to be careful with Margaret, she said, thinking of the nursemaid's loving letters. She's cared For Emma protected her. She deserves to know the truth. Truth is our strongest weapon now, Father Michael agreed. Cooper's arrest proves that. As midnight approached, their allies departed one by one, each carrying a piece of the story to spread. By morning, everyone from Silver Creek to Denver would know about Cooper's arrest, about Harrison's confession, about a mother's fight for justice. Sarah touched her locket, thinking of the empty box she'd buried in the embers. She'd been protecting a ghost, while Emma lived and breathed, just days away. The thought still had the power to buckle her knees, but now it drove her forward instead of crushing her. "Dawn's coming soon," Hawkins said softly. "We should rest while we can." But Sarah's eyes were fixed on the mountain trails marked on their map, each one a possible path to Emma. Rest could wait. She had a daughter to find. The weather-worn journal lay open on Father Michael's desk, its final entry still drying. They ride for Denver at dawn. God grant them speed and shelter. Outside, the storm that had threatened all evening finally broke, rain drumming against the chapel's roof like bullets. Sarah checked her gun one last time, the weight of it unfamiliar but necessary. Through the window, lightning illuminated the mountain trails they would soon climb. Paths more suited to mountain goats than horses, especially in this weather. "Storm might work in our favor," Hawkins said, studying the clouds. "Harrison's men will expect us to wait it out, and rain will wash away our tracks." Clara appeared with fresh coffee and news. "Telegraph lines are down east of Silver Creek. Storm took them. Harrison won't be able to send messages to his estate until they're repaired. A small advantage, but they'd take what they could get." Sarah tucked the journal into her saddlebag. Father Michael's documentation of everything. That had happened, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. Insurance, in case anything happened to them on the trail. "Two riders approaching," Clara warned, peering through the rain-streaked glass. "Fast." Hawkins moved to the window, rifle ready, but relaxed at what he saw. "Mary Carson's boys." The young men burst in, dripping water and urgency. "Harrison's men," the older one panted. 24 riders moving west from Denver, armed for war." "They're not waiting for official channels," Hawkins said grimly. "Harrison's making his move now." Sarah felt time slipping away like water through her fingers. Every minute they delayed was another minute Harrison's men drew closer to Emma. "How long until they reach the estate?" 3 days, minimum," the younger Carson boy said. "They're taking the main road, moving careful to avoid federal patrols." Sarah met Hawkins' eyes. They shared the same thought. 3 days by the main road meant 2 days by the mining trails, if they pushed hard and the weather didn't kill them. "There's more," the older boy added. "Talk in town about Cooper. Someone helped him escape federal custody an hour ago. He's in the wind." The news hit like a physical blow. Cooper knew these mountains as well as they did. If he reached Denver first, Father Michael's steady voice cut through their fears. "Then you must ride now, before the storm grows worse. The Lord helps those who help themselves." Clara pressed a package into Sarah's hands, letters, maps, and a small Bible. "Margaret Wells is a God-fearing woman. Show her these. Help her. Understand. She'll do what's right." Sarah hugged her friend fiercely, then turned to Father Michael. The old priest's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he blessed them both. Outside, their horses shifted nervously in the rain. The mountain trails would be treacherous, narrow paths along sheer drops made deadlier by the storm. But somewhere at the end of those trails was Emma, growing and changing with each day that passed. "Ready?" Hawkins asked softly. Sarah touched her locket one last time, feeling the nursemaid's letter inside. Emma's waited long enough. They rode into the storm as thunder shook the mountains. Behind them, Father Michael's chapel bell began to toll, not in warning this time, but in prayer. The official seal caught the weak sunlight filtering through the storm clouds, its golden surface marred by mud and rain. Sarah found it half buried. In the mining trail, pressed into the earth by desperate hoofbeats. Cooper had passed this way and recently. "He's running scared," Hawkins said, examining the tracks. "Pushing his horse too hard for these trails. He'll kill the animal before he reaches Denver." They'd been riding for 18 hours, stopping only when the darkness made the mountain paths too treacherous to navigate. The storm had eased but not broken, shrouding the peaks in mist and treachery. "He's not running," Sarah said, remembering. The cold calculation in Cooper's eyes. "He's racing us to Emma, his last bargaining chip." A rock slide had taken out part of the trail ahead, leaving barely enough room for a horse to pick its way across. Beyond it, the path switched back and forth up the mountainside, each turn a possible ambush point. "We should rest the horses," Hawkins suggested, but his eyes said something different. They were being watched. Sarah dismounted slowly, making a show of checking her mare's legs. As she knelt, she saw them, fresh boot prints leading to a cave mouth just above the trail. Someone had taken shelter there during the worst of the storm. Hawkins whistled softly, their agreed-upon signal. 3 armed men were moving through the rocks above, trying to get behind them. "Cooper's men," he murmured. "Must have split, up to cover different trails." Sarah felt oddly calm as she drew her revolver. The lessons Hawkins had given her during their brief rest stops came back with crystal clarity. How many bullets did Cooper have when he escaped? 6, according to the Carson boys. Hawkins smiled grimly. "He's used 2 already, by my count." Tracks back there showed him firing at shadows. A pebble clattered down the slope, someone above losing their footing in their haste to get into position. Sarah remembered Cooper's words about progress requiring sacrifice, about people like her being in the way. Not this time. The first shot came from above, going wide. Sarah fired twice at the muzzle flash, hearing a satisfying cry of pain. Hawkins' rifle cracked like thunder, and one of Cooper's men tumbled from his perch. The remaining ambushers broke and ran, leaving their wounded behind. The man Sarah had hit clutched his shoulder, staring up at her with fear and recognition. "Deputy Wade," she said, remembering his face from town. "Still doing Cooper's dirty work?" "He promised us shares," Wade gasped. "In the new territory, once the right people owned the land." "The right people?" Sarah's voice could have frozen the rain itself. "My daughter. Where is Cooper taking her?" "Don't know about any kid. He just said to slow you down. Harrison's sending a train." "Oh, private car. Boston." Sarah felt the world tilt. "A train would be faster than any horse. If they missed it." "When?" Hawkins pressed. "When does it leave?" But Wade's eyes were glazing over, blood loss taking its toll. Sarah pressed a bandage into his wound. She hadn't survived her own. Shooting to watch another person die, even an enemy. "Get him to the nearest town," she told Hawkins. "He needs a doctor. We can't spare the time." "No." Sarah mounted up, her voice firm. "I won't orphan another child. He has a daughter in Silver Creek, remember? Get him help, then catch up to me. I'll follow Cooper's trail." Hawkins stared at her for a long moment. "You're a better person than they deserve." "I'm the person Emma deserves," Sarah corrected, "and I won't let her grow up thinking her mother chose vengeance over mercy." They parted ways at the next fork, Hawkins leading Wade's horse toward a distant mining camp, while Sarah pressed on toward Denver. The storm was breaking at last, sunlight piercing the clouds like divine arrows. Cooper's trail led ever upward, marked by his dropped seal and his desperation. But Sarah rode with purpose now, not fear. She would reach Emma, not as a ghost of vengeance, but as a mother, as herself. The heavy iron prison keys clattered against the floorboards of Harrison's study as Cooper fell, blood seeping from where Sarah's bullet had grazed his shoulder. Outside the manor's windows, dawn was breaking over Denver's skyline, painting the world in shades of judgment. "You're too late," Cooper gasped, clutching his wound. "Train's already arranged. Harrison's men will have her halfway to Boston before you." "The train's been delayed." Margaret Wells's voice cut through the room like a blade. The nursemaid stood in the doorway, Emma held protectively in her arms. The child, Sarah's heart, stopped at the sight of her, was awake and staring with wide eyes at the scene before her. Sarah's hands trembled on her revolver as she looked at her daughter for the first time in months. Emma had grown so much, her dark curls longer, her face losing its baby softness. But those eyes, John's eyes, were exactly as she remembered. She was never Harrison's to give away, Margaret continued, her voice shaking with controlled fury. I found the letters this morning hidden in his desk, about the land schemes, about Judge Prescott, about how you stole her from her mother's arms. Cooper tried to reach for his fallen gun, but Sarah's boot pinned his wrist to the floor. It was necessary, he snarled. Progress demands... Demands what? Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. Murdered judges? Burned homes? Stolen children? The territory needed men of vision. Cooper's facade finally cracked, desperation bleeding through. Not weak women and their brats claiming land that could have... Emma began to cry at his raised voice, and the sound broke something in Sarah. Not with anger or grief, but with a fierce, protective love that washed away all thoughts of vengeance. Margaret, she said softly, never taking her eyes off Cooper, my name is Sarah Thorne, and that's my daughter you're holding. The nursemaid's eyes filled with tears of understanding. I knew something wasn't right. The way Harrison insisted she was his grandchild, but never visited. The way he rushed to arrange this trip east. She looked down at Emma, with a mix of love and resignation. She cries in her sleep sometimes, calling for her mama. Hoofbeats thundered in the courtyard below. Hawkins arriving with the federal marshals. But Sarah barely heard them. Emma had stopped crying, was looking at her with a puzzled recognition that made her heart ache. My brave girl, Sarah whispered. My Emma. Something shifted in Margaret's face, a decision made. She crossed the room slowly and placed Emma in Sarah's arms. The weight of her, the familiar smell of her hair, made Sarah's knees weak. Mama? Emma's small voice held confusion, but not fear. Yes, sweet girl. Sarah's tears fell into her daughter's. Curls! Mama's here! Cooper made one last desperate move, pulling a hidden derringer from his boot. But Hawkins was already there, rifle barrel pressed against the back of his head. Some men, Hawkins said quietly, never learn when they're beaten. The federal marshals poured into the room, led by the territorial governor himself. They found Cooper's keys, unlocked his private safe, discovered the final pieces of evidence needed to bring down the entire conspiracy. But Sarah noticed none of it. She was lost in Emma's eyes, in the way her tiny fingers reached up to touch her mother's face, in the miracle of holding her daughter again. Margaret watched them with bittersweet joy. She loves stories, she offered, and she remembers the lullaby you used to sing. She hums it sometimes when she's falling asleep. Sarah looked at the woman who had loved and protected her child. Thank you, she said simply, for keeping her safe until I could find her. Will you? Margaret hesitated. Will you let me visit sometimes? Of course. Sarah's smile was genuine. Emma needs all the love she can get. Outside, justice was unfolding. Cooper and his conspirators would face trial. Harrison's empire would crumble. But in that sunlit room, something far more important was happening. A mother and daughter, separated by fire and treachery, were finding their way back to each other. One small hand in another, one heart healing another. Love, like truth, would always find its way home. The new land grant bore the territorial governor's personal seal, a proper deed this time, for a stretch of land near Father Michael's mission. Sarah held it carefully, conscious of Emma sleeping in her lap, as the evening sun painted the governor's office in amber light. It's not much, the governor said, but it's good land, and close to folks who'll look out for you both. Sarah touched the official document, remembering another deed that had started all this. But where that one had brought fire and loss, this one promised new beginnings. The federal investigation is proceeding, he continued. Harrison's contacts back east are falling like dominoes. Seems Judge Prescott wasn't the only one gathering evidence. We found letters from other judges, other territories, all documenting similar schemes. How many families? Sarah asked quietly, stroking Emma's hair. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The governor's face was grim. We're tracking them all down, making things right where we can. Your testimony will help ensure justice is served." Emma stirred in her sleep, clutching the rag doll Mary Carson's daughter had given her. She'd been quiet since leaving Harrison's estate, watching everything with solemn eyes that sometimes broke Sarah's heart. But there were moments, a smile, a laugh, a whispered "Mama," that felt like miracles. Margaret Wells had packed Emma's favorite books and toys, along with careful notes about her routines and preferences. The nursemaid's love for Emma shone through every detail, every thoughtful instruction. They'd arranged for her to visit once they were settled, a bridge between Emma's two worlds that Sarah hoped would help ease the transition. A knock at the door announced Hawkins' arrival. He'd spent the day helping federal marshals track down the last of Cooper's men, but his eyes sought Sarah and Emma first, something soft and wondering in his gaze. "Got word from Father Michael," he said. "The mission's ready whenever you are. Clara's there too, helping set up the new place." Sarah nodded, gathering Emma closer. The child snuggled into her embrace instinctively, and Sarah marveled at how natural it felt, as if those months of separation had been nothing but a dark dream. "Cooper's trial starts next week," the governor added, "but you won't have to testify in person. Your written statement, combined with the evidence we've gathered, will be enough." "And Harrison? Singing like a canary in exchange for leniency. His empire's finished one way or another." Sarah stood carefully, cradling Emma. The new land grant felt like a promise in her pocket, not just of a home, but of a future where justice meant more than vengeance. "There's one more thing," Hawkins said softly. "Mary Carson and some of the other families, they're talking about forming a cooperative, sharing resources, helping each other work the land. They're hoping you might be interested." Sarah looked at him, seeing past the trail-worn exterior to the man who'd risked everything to help her find her daughter. "And you thought I might stick around," he said carefully. "If you're amenable. Someone needs to help build that new place of yours." Emma chose that moment to wake, blinking sleepily at them both. Her small hand reached out to touch Hawkins' weathered face with the innocent curiosity of childhood. "Horse," she said definitively, making them all laugh. "That's right, little lady," Hawkins smiled. "I'm the horseman." The governor watched them with approval. "The territory needs more of this," he said. "Families, communities, people looking out for each other, not men like Cooper and Harrison with their schemes and empires." Sarah thought of Father Michael's mission, of Clara's quiet strength, of Mary Carson's generosity. She thought of Margaret Wells, loving Emma enough to let her go. Even in the darkest times there had been light, people choosing to do right, to help, to heal. "We should go," she said. "It's a long ride home." Home. The word felt different now, fuller, not just a place, but a promise, like the land grant. In her pocket, like Emma in her arms, like Hawkins walking beside them as they left the governor's office, his hand gentle on her back. The sun was setting over Denver, but for Sarah Thorne and her daughter, it felt like dawn. The restored family photograph sat on the mantel of Sarah's new home, carefully mended where the flames had tried to claim it. Emma stood on tiptoe to look at it each morning, touching the image of her father with gentle fingers. "Tell me again, Mama," she would say, and Sarah would lift her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "That's your papa," she'd answer. "He was brave and strong, just like you." The house was coming along nicely, thanks to Hawkins and the cooperative's help. Simple but sturdy, with large windows that let in the mountain light. Sarah had insisted on a stone foundation. No more wooden root cellars. No more hiding in the dark. Clara visited often, teaching Emma to make flower chains, while Sarah worked in the garden. Sometimes Margaret Wells would come too, bringing books and stories from Denver. The two women who had mothered Emma found an easy friendship, bound by their shared love for the child. Father Michael blessed the house once it was finished, his weathered hands trailing over the fresh-cut timber. "From ashes to glory," he said softly. "God's way is mysterious indeed." The cooperative was thriving. Mary Carson's boys helped with the heavy work, while her daughter looked after the younger children. Other families joined, each bringing their own skills and stories. They looked out for each other, shared what they had, kept watch against the darkness that had nearly claimed them all. Sarah found Cooper's letter of confession one evening, tucked away in her trunk. She read it one last time, then walked to the fireplace where Emma was playing with her dolls under Hawkins' watchful eye. "What's that, Mama?" Emma asked as Sarah held the paper over the flames. "Just an old story, sweet girl, one we don't need anymore." The paper caught quickly, curling into ash. Sarah watched it burn, feeling not triumph, but peace. The truth was safe now, documented in Father Michael's journal, in the governor's records, in the justice being served in Denver's courts. Emma climbed into her lap, warm and solid and real. "Tell me our story again," she said, snuggling close. Sarah caught Hawkins' eye over their daughter's head, for he had become that somehow, as natural as breathing. He nodded, understanding. "Once upon a time," Sarah began, holding her daughter tight, "love was stronger than fire, stronger than fear, stronger than anything." Outside, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the world in shades of amber. And promise, tomorrow would bring more work, more healing, more life. But tonight, in the warmth of their new home, Sarah Thorne held her daughter and felt the last embers of her grief finally cool, replaced by something stronger, something that, like Emma, had survived against all odds. Hope, burning bright as dawn. The wedding ring caught the morning light as Sarah slipped it onto her finger, its simple gold band replacing the silver locket she'd worn for so long. Emma helped Margaret Wells scatter wildflower petals along the chapel aisle, while Clara adjusted Sarah's dress one final time. Father Michael's weathered face beamed as he prepared to conduct the ceremony. His chapel was full. Mary Carson and her children, the cooperative families, even the territorial governor had come to witness this new beginning. "Ready?" Clara whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. Through the chapel window, Sarah could see the mountains where their story had unfolded. Somewhere up there was an empty grave, covered now in spring flowers, but here was life and love and future, as bright as the ring on her finger. Hawkins waited at the altar, looking almost boyish in his new suit, but his eyes held the same steady strength that had helped her through fire and darkness to find her child. Emma ran to her mother, taking her hand. "Can we go now, Mama?" Sarah looked down at her daughter, then at the man who had helped bring them back together. The morning sun streamed through the chapel windows, painting everything in shades of hope. "Yes, sweet girl," she said softly. "We can go now." Together they walked toward tomorrow's light.